Hello, class. In this lecture, we'll look at chapter 17 in the Gospel of Matthew. Verse 1. 6 days later, Jesus took with him Peter, James, and John, his brother, and led them up on a high mountain by themselves. And he was transfigured before them, and his face shone like the sun, and his garments became as white as light. And behold, Moses and Elijah appeared to them, talking with him. Peter said to Jesus, "Lord, it is good for us to be here. If you wish, I will make 3 tabernacles here, one for you, and one for Moses, and one for Elijah." 6 days later, after the events at the end of chapter 16, we're now looking at the bullets, Jesus took Peter, James, and John with him up a high mountain by themselves. There Jesus was transfigured before his inner circle of disciples. This was a revelation of God's glory. Jesus' glory, the Shekinah glory. The radiance of his glory was evidenced in his face and in his garments that became as white as the light. Moses and Elijah appeared from heaven in some visible form and talked with Jesus about his coming death. Perhaps Moses, the saved who have died or will die, and Elijah, the saved who will not experience death and caught up into heaven alive, which was his experience, and the disciples saved who are present in physical bodies, represent categories of individuals who will be in Jesus' coming kingdom. Peter saw the significance of the event and suggested that he erect 3 tabernacles. He saw in this event the fulfillment of the Feast of Tabernacles, which looked forward to Israel's restoration and blessings in the Messianic kingdom. Verse 5 reads, "While he was still speaking, a bright cloud overshadowed them. And behold, a voice out of the dead cloud said, 'This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased. Listen to him.' When the disciples heard this, they fell face down to the ground and were terrified. And Jesus came to them and touched them and said, 'Get up and do not be afraid.' And lifting up their eyes, they saw no one except Jesus himself alone." Now look at the bullets. While Peter was still speaking, a more important voice spoke from a bright cloud that had enveloped them. The voice said, "This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased. Listen to him." This authentication of the Son of God by the voice of God the Father carried great significance for the disciples. Years later, when Peter wrote his second epistle, he referred to this very event. This authentication of Jesus by the Father caused the disciples to fall on their faces. When the Lord himself told the disciples to get up, they saw no one except Jesus, because Moses and Elijah had departed. Look at verse 9. "As they were coming down from the mountain, Jesus commanded them, saying, 'Tell the vision to no one until the Son of Man has risen from the dead.' And his disciples asked him, 'Why then do the scribes say that Elijah must come first?' And he answered and said, 'Elijah is coming and will restore all things. But I say to you that Elijah already came, and they did not recognize him, but did to him whatever they wished. So also the Son of Man is going to suffer at their hands.' Then the disciples understood that he had spoken to them about John the Baptist." Now we look at the bullets. As this small group returned from the mountain, Jesus told the 3 not to tell anyone what they had witnessed until he had risen from the dead. This event was a taste of the kingdom, but the disciples were puzzled. Many were teaching that before Messiah could come, Elijah must return. Jesus explained that Elijah must in fact come and restore all things. But Elijah had already come in the person of John the Baptist and was not recognized. As the religious leaders rejected John the Baptist, Jesus too would be rejected. Everything necessary to bring in Messiah's kingdom had been performed. The only contingency was the acceptance by the nation of Israel of her rightful king. Verse 14. When they came to the crowd, a man came up to Jesus, falling on his knees before him and saying, Lord, have mercy on my son, for he is a lunatic and is very ill. For he often falls into the fire, often into the water. I brought him to your disciples, and they could not cure him. And Jesus answered and said, You unbelieving and perverted generation, how long will I be with you? How long shall I put up with you? Bring him here to me. And Jesus rebuked him, and the demon came out of him, and the boy was cured at once. Now look at the bullets. When Jesus and the inner circle returned to the other disciples, a crowd had gathered, or was gathered, because a man with an epileptic son had sought healing help from the disciples. However, the disciples had not been able to drive out the demon that possessed the boy. The father appealed to Jesus, kneeling before him and addressing him as Lord. Jesus asked for the boy to be brought to him, and he rebuked not only the disciples, but also the entire crowd for their lack of faith. Jesus immediately drove the demon out of the boy and restored him completely from that moment. Verse 19. Verse 19 reads, Then the disciples came to Jesus privately and said, Why could we not drive it out? And he said to them, Because of the littleness of your faith. For truly I say to you, if you have faith the size of a mustard seed, you will say to this mountain, Move from here to there, and it will move, and nothing will be impossible for you. But this kind does not go out except by prayer and faith and fasting. When the disciples inquired why they had not been able to heal the boy, Jesus said their problem was their little faith. Even a small amount of faith, as small as a mustard seed, is adequate to move a huge mountain, assuming, of course, that the move is in God's will. Nothing is impossible with God, but this kind does not go out except by prayer and fasting. Jesus was instructing the disciples about their future ministries. Their problem often would be a lack of faith and failure to seek their Lord's direction. His word would be sufficient to produce the healing, but their action would necessitate great faith and constant contact with the Lord through prayer. Verse 22. And while they were gathering together in Galilee, Jesus said to them, The Son of Man is going to be delivered into the hands of men, and they will kill him, and he will be raised on the third day. And they were deeply grieved. Again, Jesus reminded the disciples that he was to be betrayed, and wicked men would kill him. One could never say that Jesus would take Jesus by surprise. He was in control of his life, and no one took it from him. He also told the disciples that death would not be the end for him. Again, he said he would rise on the third day. Unlike before, this announcement of his death was not met by any recorded opposition from the disciples, but they were filled with grief over the Lord's words. One wonders if they heard the complete message or simply the part about his death. Verse 24. When they came to Capernaum, those who collected the 2 drachma tax came to Peter and said, Does your teacher not pay the 2 drachma tax? He said, Yes. And when he came into the house, Jesus spoke to him first, saying to Peter, What do you think, Simon? From whom do the kings of the earth collect customs or poll tax? From their sons or from strangers? And when Peter said, From strangers, Jesus said to him, Then the sons are exempt. When Jesus and The disciples arrived back. So let's look at the bullets. When Jesus and his disciples arrived back in Capernaum, tax collectors were waiting for them. According to custom, every Jew 20 years old and above was required to pay a temple tax. But both Peter and Jesus had apparently not yet paid their tax for that year. So the collectors sought Peter out. Their question about the Lord's not paying his tax implied that he was not keeping the law. Peter responded that the Lord would pay the tax in compliance to the law. Before Peter spoke to the Lord about this matter, Jesus asked him if kings collect duty and taxes from their own sons or from others. Peter replied that kings do not collect taxes from family members, for they were exempt, but they do collect from others. Verse 27. However, so that we do not offend them, go to the sea and throw in a hook, and take the first fish that comes up, and when you open its mouth, you will find a shekel. Take that and give it to them for you and me. Look at the bullets. The Lord was demonstrating to Peter that not only should he as king be tax-free, that is, Jesus is the king, is he not? But also his disciples as sons of the kingdom should be tax-free. They too had a privileged position, and the king should provide all they needed. However, the Lord did not intend at this time to make an issue, that is, offend them, over such a small point. The religious leaders were looking for accusations to use against Jesus. Peter was told to do something he really enjoyed. The Lord sent him fishing. Peter was to throw out his line, and a special catch would be brought in. This fish would have in its mouth a specific coin, a shekel. That would be the exact amount Peter needed to pay the tax for himself and the Lord. The Lord thereby demonstrated his submission to ruling authority. And that concludes this lecture on chapter 17.